Have you ever wondered how Jesus' teachings from over 2,000 years ago still resonate with us today? Those teachings not only shook the world at that time, but also changed the course of human history. Let's go back to the Galilean hill, where Jesus shared a lesson that changed countless lives. It wasn't just a sermon, it was a timeless message. Let's uncover the transformative message Jesus shared. We're standing before a hill in Galilee, where over 2,000 years ago, Jesus delivered one of his most famous lessons. At that time, Galilee was under Roman control, a period of great upheaval and unrest. The common people lived in poverty, heavily taxed, and with little hope for the future. It was here that Jesus gathered them and spoke words that no one could ever forget. Can you imagine hearing a message that changes the way you see life? The words he spoke that day weren't just teachings. They were an invitation to transformation. That sermon is known today as the Sermon on the Mount. He began with words we now call the Beatitudes. But what made these words so powerful? Why did they have such a great impact? Let's dive deeper in the next section. As Jesus walked up the hill, hundreds of people gathered to hear him speak. They were the poor, the sick, and the hopeless, yet their eyes carried a spark of hope. The Pharisees and Roman soldiers watched from a distance, wondering what was about to happen. As he raised his hand, silence fell over the crowd. All eyes turned toward him. On the hilltop, Jesus began the sermon we now know as the Sermon on the Mount. Each word he spoke was not just comforting, but also a call to live a radically different life. He looked at them, the poor and forgotten, and declared that they were blessed. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." These words touched the hearts of everyone listening. For the first time, they heard a message not based on power or wealth, but on humility. Jesus' message was unlike anything they had ever heard before. He continued, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." These words brought hope and healing to broken hearts. But for the religious leaders, his message was a challenge to the existing system. This wasn't just a sermon. It was an invitation to completely change how they lived and thought. Jesus continued, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." These teachings opened a new path, one of righteousness and love. He changed the way they saw themselves and the world around them. Even the children in the crowd sensed something extraordinary in his teachings. Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." These words were not just comforting, but also called them to live with compassion and forgiveness. He continued, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Every word he spoke resonated deeply within the hearts of those listening. But there were also those who felt uncertain. These teachings were so different from what they had ever heard. His sermon wasn't just to be heard, but to be lived, a call to step into the kingdom of God. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." These words were an invitation to live for peace, something the world desperately needed at the time. But for the Pharisees, this was a great challenge. He said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Jesus' words brought hope and strength to weary hearts. This sermon wasn't just teaching. It was an invitation to change their lives and beliefs. He didn't force them, but each word was an invitation to step into the light of God. Many left the hill that day with a new faith and a new way of living. Jesus' sermon planted a seed of change in the hearts of hundreds. He said, "These words are so different. They could change the world." The sermon ended, but the transformation in people's hearts had just begun. Many left the hill determined to live differently, to live for justice, mercy, and peace. Even Roman soldiers were struck by the power of his message. But not everyone agreed. Some religious leaders felt challenged. But for the humble, the sermon was a guiding light for a new future. Jesus gave hope to those who had nothing and courage to those who were afraid. The Sermon on the Mount was not just a lesson, but a call for spiritual transformation. His words about mercy, righteousness, and peace lit up their souls. He left, but his lesson was etched deeply in the hearts of thousands. They whispered to each other, "This is a message unlike anything we've ever heard before." He inspired them to begin living with hope and love. That Galilean hill became the birthplace of a spiritual revolution. He didn't just give them words, but gave them a new path to follow. The religious leaders began to realize that Jesus' words were challenging their authority. But for those who were there, the sermon opened a new hope for humanity. As they left the hill, they began sharing with each other what Jesus had said. Each person understood it in their own way, but they all realized one thing: the sermon was truth. They felt called to live differently, a life of love, righteousness, and forgiveness. However, not everyone rejoiced. Some Pharisees saw this as a threat to their traditions, but for those who heard and believed, this was a new beginning. They returned to their families, sharing the words of hope and faith they had received. Jesus' sermon was not just guidance, but a light to guide their families. They prayed for strength to put into practice what they had just learned. Even Roman soldiers couldn't ignore the power of this message. They walked away, but their hearts were still filled with Jesus' words. The religious leaders began to plot ways to silence Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount ignited hope and a longing for a better world. Some began to ask themselves, how can we live out these words every day? For the disciples, this was the moment they realized they must live to share this message. The sermon changed how they saw themselves and those around them. They realized that they were no longer alone. God was with them. Jesus' sermon encouraged their community to grow closer than ever. They believed that a new world full of love and justice was within reach. The Pharisees decided that they couldn't let Jesus continue influencing the people. Jesus' words had planted seeds of hope and change in their hearts. Jesus' teachings had begun to inspire even the youngest generation. They felt called to live a greater life, one full of mercy and hope. For the disciples, this was the moment they began to understand their mission more clearly. That sermon wasn't just a sermon, it was the beginning of a spiritual revolution. He said, "We must share this message with others. This is our mission." Jesus' message that day still echoes through generation. The disciples learned that this sermon wasn't just to be heard, but to be lived and acted upon. Jesus didn't just teach them how to live, but showed them how to love everyone. His message began to spread. Love, share, and live for others. They understood that love wasn't just words, but had to be shown through action. Gradually, those who believed in Jesus' words began spreading his message to every corner of the land. The Sermon on the Mount became a central part of the Bible, passed down through generations. From these teachings, the early church was formed, gathering those who lived by the light of Jesus. These words weren't just for adults, but inspired future generations as well. The fire of faith began to spread, from small villages to great cities. Even the Romans began to be moved by the message of love and peace. The poorest and most forgotten found comfort in Jesus' sermon. His words were like a small light, but that light illuminated the whole world. The disciples committed to taking this message further, to the ends of the earth. Jesus taught them that love and forgiveness could change the world. Centuries later, the Sermon on the Mount is still shared and changes millions of lives. Jesus' words still echo, drawing people closer to God. Millions, wherever they are, find comfort in that sermon. These words never grow old as they carry timeless life. Jesus' sermon is not just a lesson, but an invitation to live with love and hope. From a small hill in Galilee, the sermon spread to every corner of the world. And that message continues to transform lives, bringing hope to those who need it most. The Sermon on the Mount is proof that love and truth will always triumph. That Galilean hill remains a symbol of hope and transformation. That message is a reminder that everyone is valuable in God's eyes. And Jesus' sermon continues to change the world, one life at a time. Do you want to bring this message into your life? The Sermon on the Mount is not just history. It still echoes and inspires us today. You can start living these teachings by loving, forgiving, and living righteously every day. Let Jesus' teachings guide you and help you live a more meaningful life. You can also spread this message by acting for peace and love in your community. If this sermon touches you, share this video with your family and friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to discover more meaningful lessons from the Bible. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Do you love meaningful Bible stories? Top 7 Bible Stories channel will bring you inspiration and peace every day. Don't forget to like and share your thoughts in the comments section. Your sharing is the motivation for us to bring more stories. Top 7 Bible Stories. Good stories, beautiful meanings.